Okay, good afternoon. I hope everybody is having a good time. My presentation is the effectiveness of the instruction of the Intonation of English implication to Spanish L1 trainee teachers. This presentation comes from a publication from 2019. And I would like to, well, this is the reference to the paper. And I would like to begin by having a look at the outline. Okay, first I'm going to talk about the aim of the study. Then I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about the literature review. Then I'm going to talk about the scope of the study. We're going to talk about the methodology, the results, and the conclusions. And I'm also going to be talking about some limitations of this study, yeah, and some suggestions for further research. Okay, what about the aim of this study? The purpose of this uh, research was to determine the effect of instruction of the Intonation of English implications on Spanish speaking pre-service teachers. And the research question was, does the explicit teaching of the implicational fall rise have an effect on the participants' learning of such an intonation pattern? So there is only one research question, yeah. But first I would like to discuss what an implication is. Basically speaking, or in very simple words, an implication is saying something without really saying it. Yeah, saying something without using explicit words. Here we have two different definitions of what an implication is. There is one by the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English, and another one from the Cambridge Dictionary Online. Yeah, so it's something you suggest but without putting it in words. An example would be something like, okay, imagine somebody saying or asking the question, are you coming tomorrow? And then the other person might say, I think so. That reply is an implication, and it implies that the person is not sure whether they're coming tomorrow or not. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the um, literature review. And one thing that we can mention is that English is now an international language. That's no news, everybody knows that. And with the importance of English, there's been a huge impact in many different aspects of life. One of them is the teaching of foreign languages. Now, unfortunately, uh, in the world of EFL, pronunciations have sometimes been called the Cinderella of foreign language teaching. Yeah, why Cinderella? You know the story about Cinderella. Cinderella was a girl whose father got married to a woman, right? And she had two stepsisters who mistreated Cinderella, right? She had to do all the cleaning in the house. So pronunciation is sometimes referred to as the Cinderella, yeah, the neglected area of EFL. And in the history of EFL, we have seen that pronunciation has been relegated to a secondary role and pronunciation in classrooms and in all aspects of language teaching has been given very limited coverage. One of the reasons of this is that teachers do not feel confident enough to teach pronunciation. Yeah, there is a general weakness in terms of feeling prepared to teach pronunciation. Now, what is the importance of intonation? Intonation is very important because it allows us to communicate. It is crucial in terms of communication. Actually, many studies say that intonation or suprasegmentals are much more important than segmental uh, aspects. Uh, and by that I mean the sounds of English, you know, vowels and consonants. Now, when dealing with the teaching of intonation, we have to consider some aspects, such as transfer. Yeah, some of the rules of the L1 are going to be transferred to the L2. So in our case, some aspects of Spanish are going to be used in English. Yeah, so we have to bear in mind that. And we also need to bear in mind that many people, well, I would say the majority of us, are going to find it difficult to learn pronunciation after a certain age. So there is some evidence to support the notion of the critical period hypothesis. Now, in teaching pronunciation, the role of the language teacher becomes of paramount importance. Yeah? And as teachers become so important in teaching pronunciation and, well, all the different aspects, the different components of language, uh, teachers have become the focus of attention. And one way of doing that is that teachers have to meet certain standards. Yeah. I guess all of us are aware that we have disciplinary standards, which came out a few years ago. And I would like to have a look at some of those standards. Let's have a look at standard number one. Standard number one says that the teacher understands the constituent components of the English language. And he is also, or she is also able to explain how these work. Yeah. Now, a finer breakdown of this standard makes reference to the different components of pronunciation. And one of them is intonation, which you can see there in red. Now, standard number six makes reference to the level of English that teachers have got to be able to achieve. And we all know that that is a level equivalent to C1 according to the Common European Framework. Now, what does this Common European Framework of Reference say about pronunciation? Well, somebody who's at this level of mastery can vary intonation and place sentence stress correctly in order to express finer shades of meaning. So as you can see, expressing different shades of meaning becomes essential because it allows us to communicate. Now I'd like to refer a bit to some research that has been done in terms of pronunciation. Unfortunately, through the history of pronunciation research, the majority of the studies that have been carried out have been on segmentals. Yeah, and segmentals means vowels and consonants. The teaching of vowels and consonants. And there are not many studies that focus on suprasegmentals. In Chile, there was one back in 2013, which was published in 2016 by Rodriguez. And this study focused on the teaching of WH questions, or the teaching of the intonation of WH questions. Yeah, we know that in WH questions in English, we normally use a falling tone. Um, and we know that in Spanish, we generally use a rising tone, yeah, for questions. So this is an example of transfer. Oh, now more exhaustive treatment of intonation is done or has been done by Zhuang back in 2015. In this study, the author gives a very thorough account of the learning and the teaching of intonation, different patterns, not just WH questions, not just statements, but a whole range of different types of sentences. Now, the scope of this study focused on the teaching of implications in English, the teaching of the intonation of this type of sentences. Now, more specifically, I focused on the tone. The intonation of implications is very special in that we use a specific tone to say implications. We normally use a fall rise tone. Yeah? And here is an example of that. Imagine somebody asks, "How was the wedding?" And then somebody says, "The food was good." You can hear that the tone being used here is a fall rise. The food was good. So it's something like, the food was good. Now, this implication implies something. Yeah, it implies that probably the food was good, but the rest of the party was not very good. Yeah, implications can be left open or closed. In this case, it is left open because you can imagine what comes next. You can imagine the words that are not explicit. Now, I would like to make a reference to the methodology. Yeah, in um, this study involved the participation of 9 participants. All of them were students in an English teaching program. Yeah, 9 participants, I said. And their level of mastery of the L2 of English in this case was varied. Yeah, there was one student who had a level of English equivalent to C1. There were 7 students or participants who had a level equivalent to B2, and there was one who spoke English at level B1. Now, out of the 9 participants, 6 of them were males, whereas only 3 of them were female. In terms of the instrument that I used to measure the intonation of implications, I designed series of 29 short dialogues. Yeah. And then in parentheses, you can see the word initial. It means that I didn't use all of them because some of them had to be discarded. Now, out of these 29 short dialogues, there were only 21 which had an implication in them. And there were 8 distractors. Now, I had 21 implications, but only 19 of these were analyzed because for 2 of the participants, there were some missing data. Yeah. Now, the series of implications and the distractors were submitted to 5 ELT professionals. All of them had a master's degree. And here are some examples of the short dialogues I used. You can see that all of them are kind of mini conversations in which you have 2 speakers, speaker A on the one hand and speaker B. The participants were shown an image on a computer screen, and they were able to see the question you can see there spoken by person A first. They didn't have to read that, but after a couple of seconds, 5 seconds, they were shown B's part, and they were supposed to read out what B was supposed to say. Yeah, and then in green you can see that there is an implication. Uh, an example, the first one, is English difficult to learn? Well, grammar and pronunciation are, but vocabulary is easy. So these implications in green were supposed to be said with a full rise tone. So there were 21 of these, but only 19 were analyzed. Uh, Together with this intonation test, I gave the participants a survey to answer. The purpose of this survey was only to gather information about their opinion about English teaching uh, regarding some points. And the survey consisted of 2 parts. The first part aimed to collect background information, and the second part included a series of Likert scales in order to gather information about their perception of their own pronunciation and pronunciation in general. And here are the Likert scales I used in the survey. The first one said, how important do you think a teacher's pronunciation is for a learner to succeed in attaining good pronunciation in a second or foreign language? So it was a scale going from 1 to 10, in which a 1 meant unimportant and 10 meant very important. The second scale had the question, how important do you think that pronouncing a foreign language well is? Again, you have the same type of scale. And then there are 2 more scales in the survey in the second part. On a scale from 1 to 10, how good do you think your own pronunciation of English is? So again, from 1 to 10, 1 meaning very bad, and 10 meaning very good. And finally, how much do you think your teacher's pronunciation influenced your own pronunciation attainment? Again, the same type of scale going from 1 to 10. Now, the procedure. Now I'm going to refer to how I implemented this study. At the beginning of the process, the 9 participants were subjected to a pretest. This pretest had the 29 mini conversations, the 21 implications, plus the 8 distractors. They had to read out these mini conversations and they were recorded. Then, after the pretest, they were given a 4 session training program, you might say. Yeah, so 4 sessions, each session lasted about an hour and 30 minutes. And the sessions were done over a period of 2 weeks. Now, the sessions included example sentences, lots of drilling, so many repetition exercises, both individually and as a group. I would like to say that most of the material that I used in the intervention was taken from the book English Intonation and Introduction by J.C. Wells. And then after this, for session intervention, there was a post-test. The post-test was exactly the same as a pre-test. Yeah. Now, of course, there was a period of time in between. So the probability of having a test taking effect is not very high. In terms of the recordings and the scoring, well, I took the recordings and I processed all the information on prod. Prod is a piece of computer software to analyze pronunciation, to analyze different aspects of um, speech. Yeah. And the fundamental frequency was analyzed. The fundamental frequency gives you, well, I'm going to show an example in the next slide, but it tells you how the intonation or the tone of your voice moves up and down. The marking was done as follows. Each implication could have been said with the right tone or with the wrong tone. So each implication, each correctly produced implication gave each participant a score of 1. Now, if the participant was not able to produce the implication with the right intonation, he or she was given a 0 points. Yeah. Now, here is an example of the marking system. Here on the screen, you can see that there is one of the implications from the mini conversations. And then there is the rest of the sentence, which makes the implication explicit. This part, which you can see on the right-hand side, was not analyzed. But was the subject matter of this study was what you can see on the left. Here you can see that the intonation went down, the tone went down, the fundamental frequency, which is represented by this dark line, went down. So it means that this person produced this sentence with a falling tone. So instead of saying, I've done most of it, this person said something like, I've done most of it. Now, using a falling tone indicates that the person is producing a statement and not an implication. So as long as the speaker says this with a fall rise, it means that there is some information which is implied, some information which the speaker doesn't say with words. And here is a table that summarizes the results. Yeah, you can see the average score for each of the implications, the average score in the pretest and post-test, and then there is the difference, which is a gain that each participant obtained. Now, between the pre and the post-test, I had to run a Wilcoxon ranks test, which is used to compare samples like this, in which the number of participants is not very high, and the distribution of the data was not normal. And the results indicated that the participants did a much better job in the post-test. So that means that uh, the instruction in the 4 sessions did have an effect on their production of implications. And you can see that here in these two box plots as well. This is the post-test and the pre-test. You can see that the scores for the post-test was much higher. I don't know how much more time I've got. Yeah. So I'm going to skip this part, which is on the survey, and I'm just going to concentrate on the conclusions. Okay, some general conclusions from this study were as follows. Language learners can benefit from the instruction of the intonation of English implications, and not just implications in general. Um, they can benefit from the instruction of pronunciation, yeah, because there are lots of studies which support this, in spite of what some people say. I would like to point out as well that these results are not conclusive. It is necessary to study intonation through a much wider range of uh, sentences and intonation patterns as well. Then motivation may play an important role given the participant's characteristic. This finding comes from the survey. I'm going to get back to that part. As you can see here, the participants claimed that they were around the midpoint on the scale. So that means that they possibly expect to improve. Yeah. So that means that they might achieve a much higher result. And finally, it is necessary to highlight the role of the English teacher and his importance as a model of foreign language pronunciation. Uh, this is pretty connected to the standards. And it is also important because pronunciation is generally neglected. We can see that in practicum students, uh, uh, teacher educators can see that when they have to check lesson plans. Generally, it's very rare to find somebody who plans a pronunciation lesson. Okay? And with this, I've come to the end. Thank you very much. I'm going to skip these limitations. So, thank you. And here is a list of references as well.